Gonzalo, it's been life is crazy, and I think social media, I've always said, is a blessing and a curse. And I think this is one of those examples of a blessing because this is how we connected, and we were able to, you've made yourself, excuse me, you've made yourself available for a conversation. And I want to say, first off, thank you for that. And if you don't mind, doing a brief introduction for people that don't know who you are.
Sure. I run a channel called Gonzalo Lira again. It's like my third channel. Um, I started as a screenwriter in Hollywood, and then I transitioned into writing novels. I published several with mainstream publishing companies. They were like thrillers. I did them in the late 90s. And then I went into producing movies in South America, and then I got into other stuff because the hard part of making a movie is finding the capital, finding the money to make them. And so I got into venture finance, and from there I got into different businesses and just, did different things. For a while, I was doing my first brush with internet fame was in '08, '09. I was managing some money, not a lot, but because my family background is a bit in banking and finance, though I myself studied history and philosophy. And what happened in '09 or '10, I started observing what was going on insofar as, I've been watching things like Hawk since 2007 when Bear Stearns went under. And I started doing a blog just to figure out ideas in terms of money management. And I got internet famous for a while doing that blog. And then I sort of like forgot about the internet stuff and went to other businesses. And eventually I basically retired in 2016. I'd made my, can I use, naughty language on your thing?
You can say whatever you want.
Okay, I got my fuck you money in 2016. And after that, I was just bored and I started doing a YouTube channel called Coach Red Pill. That garnered about 320 or 30,000 subscribers. And I did that for a few years just for fun. And people think it was like a dating coach thing, and it wasn't at all. It was basically, you see, I have a young son. I'm 55. And one of my children, my youngest son, is 8. And I figured that I should do like videos that would give him good advice when he needs it in his late 20s and 30s, when I'll probably be a doddering old man or senile or dead, And so I started doing these videos, the CRP videos, and they did very well. I had several that had over 1 million views, which is kind of shocking. And I was winding that down and just preparing to sort of like exit the whole online scene in late 2021 when the whole Ukraine thing started happening. And I live in Ukraine because my ex-wife is Ukrainian, and she's from the region of Kharkov. And we were living here, and I like it here very much. For it's just a great town, great city. And then the war started, and I happened to be in Kiev when the war broke out. And I started doing impromptu videos on my Telegram channel, my YouTube channels, about what was actually going on in the middle of Kiev, because I was staying at a hotel, the Premier Palace. I arrived literally the night before the invasion because I had to do some business. I had to do a couple of bureaucratic things that were not particularly complicated, but I was meeting some business people. And, I arrived that evening, I had a couple of drinks things, and then I decided, I'll get some McDonald's and just chill out. And the next morning at 5:30 in the morning, my assistant calls me from Kharkov, and she's like, the Russians invaded, the Russians invaded. And so I started doing these impromptu videos from my hotel, and they gained a lot of traction. And then after a week, I got kicked out of my hotel because they said that I was like like some sort of Russian agent, because I was just saying that this was crazy. This war is this is stupid, and the Zelensky regime should sue for peace as quickly as possible because it'll destroy the country. And I got kicked out of my hotel, and I made my way back to Kharkov and arranged for the evacuation of my ex-wife and the kids. And I decided to stay and just to continue watching things. I got arrested last April by the SBU on suspicion of being a Russian agent. And they like searched all my things and stuff. And of course, I'm not like a Russian agent. I'm just some guy who's watching this shit show. And after that, I was allowed to remain, but I can't leave the country. Um, and so I decided to just stay here, and I've been watching the war ever since and commenting on it. And it's wild, I'll tell you that. It's pretty funny because sometimes I think that I'm like the Zelig character in the Woody Allen movie, like this random person who seems to find himself in the middle of all kinds of, incredible things that happen. Back in the early 2000s, I lived in downtown New York and downtown in Manhattan, in the financial district. I lived 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center, and I missed it by 30 days. But all my friends were there and the people I'd known. And so, I got firsthand accounts of that whole thing. And then, like, I don't know, like in 2010, there was the second biggest earthquake ever recorded in Chile. And I was on the 15th floor of my apartment. And I experienced that. That was pretty cool. And, I was in Kiev, arriving the very eve of the invasion of the Russians, And so it's kind of amusing. I mean, sometimes I think that, I wrote my life like a screenplay for a movie. I'm just wondering how it ends. So anyway, that's basically a brief intro, if you will.
It's almost like you're a cat with 9 lives, Gonzalo.
I don't know about that, but I've just seen a lot of stuff because look, look, how could I put this? I have great respect for people who are believers, who are religiously minded. I'm not one of these atheists who says, who tries to proselytize his own atheism. I myself am not so blessed with belief. And so because of it, I think that this is the only life you're going to live. So you might as well see as much of life as you possibly can and go to as many places as you want to. And there was a very foolish movie called Yes Man by Jim Carrey, where he was a man who was hypnotized into always saying yes to everything, every opportunity that came his way. And that's actually a very good way to live. And that's more or less the kind of life that I live, that whenever there's an opportunity, I just grab it and just see what happens. What's the worst that can happen? You fail. Failing isn't that big of a deal. It doesn't hurt that much. It's like, when I was a kid, I used to get into street fights with my buddies, against other little gangs or whatever. Well, not so little. I mean, you're talking early 20s, right? And the thing that you discover in your first street fight, you're going to be really, really scared. But when you get hit and you get knocked down, you shake yourself off and you realize, oh, that didn't hurt that bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And you get up and you start swinging and you win, And that's the thing I've noticed, that failure doesn't hurt very much. You imagine it's going to be much worse. But I've been close to bankruptcy on several occasions. I've been dirt poor as a student. With like nothing, when I graduated from Dartmouth, I flew out to LA. And when I arrived at LAX, I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night, and I didn't have any money or anything, You just have to go and you have to see what happens. That's the fun of life, You never know what's going to happen. And you'd be surprised at how resourceful you can become when the chips are really down, when the pressure is really on. And most people shy away from danger and they try to tamp down risk. That's kind of foolish, to my way of thinking, because you'd be surprised the resourcefulness you discover within yourself when things are really rough, and you'll get over just about anything, And so that's the way I live my life. Just going after whatever seems interesting at the time, and I'll figure out later how to make money or how to earn a living or how to pay for stuff. Just go. That's the way I live my life.
And not to spend a ton of time to talk about your upbringing, but I mean, with your parents, what were they like, and what did they instill in you? Did that attribute?
My parents are, I suppose you could say they were upper middle class. In my own case, I'm from Chile, and I come from a fairly well-to-do and in some cases rather distinguished antecedents. And one of my forefathers was the first president of Chile, a very romantic figure named José Miguel Carrera, who was, dashing, young, handsome, betrayed by his enemies, like a really cool guy. And he lived his life. And it's not so much that I'm sort of like emulating him, certainly not, but he ended badly, as all heroic figures often do. But rather, you know, what my parents inculcated, I suppose, was the notion that the world is interesting and that you should see as much of it as possible. Yeah.
And as you've gotten a little bit older, and I share with you my age, your mentality hasn't changed.
Well, no, because I mean, like, I'm 55, and it always kind of surprises me because mentally I feel I'm still 15, you know. The body is breaking down, that's for sure. You know, a lot more gray hair, you know, and my receding hairline, why do you think I wear the hat, you know? But mentally I know I'm still 15. And I certainly don't want to lose that sensibility of just being interested in whatever is going on and just open to new experiences, always saying yes to any opportunity.
That's great words. That's a coffee mug right there, Gonzalo.
Sure, I'll make $1 billion off my little mug. Yeah,
Send me one of those too, because I'm the one that came up with the idea. You make $1 million. I'll ask for as a free mug. That's my fee.
okay, I'll be sure to send you one. No, but seriously, I mean, so many people are so damn afraid of everything, and unfortunately, the culture nowadays in the West, you know, foments this notion that you should always be afraid and terrified, and you know, is it safe? Who cares if it's safe? You know, just go. You know, it's not going to be that bad. Nothing is ever as bad as your imagination, either the bad or the good. I mean, like, for instance, when I published my first novel, I thought it was going to be like incredible, like climbing Everest. And I actually went to a Barnes and Noble. I was living in LA at the time, and I went to a Barnes and Noble, and they had a pyramid of my first novel, which is a trivial thriller. It wasn't that big of a deal, you know. It wasn't like that Everest moment. There wasn't great satisfaction or anything. It was like, oh, that's nice, you know. Because what happens is that we fear the bad things that might happen to us, but at the same time we think that achieving the goal is going to be this great moment, and it rarely is. The moments of true happiness catch you unawares. The moments of truly being happy and truly feeling satisfied, they're brief moments, and the notion of living your life to be happy, quote unquote, is foolish. Happiness is a rare thing that often is not. It catches you unawares. And people say that, oh, you know, I want to find a nice woman and be happy with her. That's a mistake. That's a huge mistake. You know, I mean, what you should be looking for is a woman who has the same goals as you, because it's a partnership. You know, when you decide that you're going to pursue some business opportunity, say, and you realize you need a partner. Well, why do you pick a partner? Because they have abilities that you're weak in, and you have abilities that you're strong in that they lack, perhaps. And so the whole notion is that you come together with a partner in order to complement each other, you know, that you'll be strong where they're weak and they'll be strong where you're weak. The same with a marriage, the same with a relationship, a romantic relationship. But people don't think in those terms. They think in terms of, I want to be happy. That's foolish, you know. That's why so many relationships are so miserable, because they're trying to be happy all the time, as opposed to understand that you are in a partnership and you ought to be thinking, what is the goal you are pursuing? And don't tell me this goal is to be happy. No. It has to be a specific goal, you know, to build a family, say, or to create a nice, cozy home. But the notion of being happy, you know, happiness, like I said, it comes rarely, catches you by surprise, and it's never what you think. I've been in a position of being like a cash millionaire, of having, you know, literally, you know, 7 figures in my bank account. And you think, oh, you can go and buy stuff. And I did. I went through that period of buying crap. None of it made me particularly happy, you know. You think that it'll be really cool when you can buy whatever car you want, just walk onto the lot and say, here's my card, I want that car, you know, with all the trimmings. And I've been able to do that, right? Didn't make me happy. But random little things in life. That's what makes you happy.
You know, and it's how many times you come across people, and I come across it a lot, where people look at somebody else and they say, oh, they've got all this money, this big house. I don't have that. You know, people that are my age, and they think that that's just going to solve everything.
Yeah. Well, money does solve problems in the day to day. Okay. How could I put it? You need like a minimum to live all right. But once you reach that minimum, everything else is just extra. And in my own case, you know, I'm well off enough, I suppose. And now, you know, what would I like? Like an object that I could buy that I can afford? Man, pretty much nothing, you know. I mean, cigarettes, you know, a nice meal. You know, you get to a point where you don't need stuff. It's the people who, how could I put it? People have been convinced by our society to pursue material objects as the way to find satisfaction. But you don't find satisfaction in owning something. You get satisfaction from the process of doing something to your satisfaction. And that's how you find real happiness and fulfillment. But owning something. Before the show started, you were telling me that you'd never watched Fight Club. That's a good picture, and you recently saw it. And there's that great line that Tyler Durden says that, you know, the things you own end up owning you. Well, that's very true, and it's happened to me when I had all these possessions, and they weighed on me, and I didn't know what to do. They were just a mental clutter, and you'd be surprised how wonderful it is to lose that mental clutter, to just grab all your shit, sell all that you can, throw away the rest, and just be, you know, without material objects, because you don't really need that much, you know. And like I said before, I'm not a believer. And so because of it, I realized that what's really valuable are the experiences that you have, the ideas and the realizations that you have as you grow older and see more of the world. But the idea of getting any kind of satisfaction or happiness from an object, that's foolish. You know? I mean, like, for instance, recently I had to, I didn't have to, I wanted to. I bought some toys for my children, you know, and I wanted to get the right toy or whatever. And they were thrilled, you know, they were absolutely thrilled. But you see, I bought it because I knew it would make them happy, and it would make them happy because they're children, they're immature, and they want the little toy, you know. My youngest children are, like I said, my son is 8 and my daughter is 10. And so they're still at that age where for them, like a material object, like a toy is like a big deal. But as you become an adult, you realize the material things are not particularly important, you know. And whatever toy, quote unquote, you might have, it's not so much that it's the toy itself, but it's a tool to do some activity that you enjoy doing. I mean, a while ago, I bought a router because I do just minor woodworking stuff. And I bought this router, you know, and I was very happy about it, not because of the router, you know, one of these hand routers, right? But because I was going to be able to round off an edge of this desk that I'm building, you see? And so the objects become really a tool to achieve something else. They should never be ends in themselves. But that's my thinking.
Well, and you said something, mentioned about, you know, we become as a society so fearful, so afraid to do anything. And there was a period of time, Gonzalo, where, you know, this country, when the settlers came, they weren't afraid. Now we, for my time, but they weren't afraid.
Yeah.
You loaded up the
Well,
wagon, you loaded your Bible, and you took what you could and you pressed on.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a lot more scary because, you know, there was no internet. You didn't know if you'd survive. I mean, think of the Donner Party. We wound up eating each other in the wilds of the Rocky Mountains, right? I mean, you know, it was much more uncertain, and yet people would go and see what would happen. But now everybody's just so afraid, you know, and the risk has been tamped down in everything. And people don't do some activity unless they have the right protection, you know. They have the right jacket, the right this, the right gear, you know. I like to ride around on a motorcycle, right? I've got several. And I crashed one recently, and it was like, it wasn't fun, but you know, it happens. And the thing is, see, I've noticed a lot of motorcycle guys will buy the very expensive motorcycle, and then they'll get all this gear, the big heavy jacket with all this quote unquote protection. And they buy all this stuff to reduce the risk of something that is inherently dangerous. And they're just fooling themselves insofar as the notion that they can tamp down risk. You can't. There's always going to be an element of risk of whatever you do. And just walking down the street, you can get hit by a bus or a meteorite, right? But people are obsessed with that. And I find it ridiculous. No, it's not that I find it ridiculous. I find it rather sad because people out of fear don't pursue the things that they truly would like to do because they think that they don't have the brains to do it. They don't have enough money to do it. They don't have this or they don't have that. They don't have the right protection. And you don't need money. You don't need anything. You just need the will to do it, to go and pursue whatever you want to do. And the consequences are not going to be that bad. I mean, like in my own case, when I finished college, I had several opportunities that would have been much safer rather than going to Los Angeles. I had the opportunity to work at an investment bank, Goldman Sachs, as a matter of fact. I was recruited and everything, and I was assured a position as an analyst if I wanted to. I did the PLSAT, which is sort of like the prep for the LSAT for law school, right? I took it cold just to see how I do, and I got the exact median score of Harvard Law School. So there was another opportunity. There was also the chance of working at Time magazine as a writer because an editor there had read some of my stuff that I'd written in the school paper, and he liked it. I reviewed books and movies, basically because if I reviewed them, I'd get a free copy of the book or a free ticket to see the movie. And so because of that, I have the opportunity to work at Time, but it was all just very safe. And, I decided to do something riskier. What was the worst that could have happened to me? I would have had a miserable time, maybe couch surfed among random acquaintances that I made along the way or something like that. And, after a year or two of just failure, I would have probably done something else. But, it wouldn't have been that bad. But so many people, unfortunately, are so afraid that they take the safest route and they do only the safest things. And they're fundamentally dissatisfied. And later, they're always regretful. They're always regretting that they didn't do the thing that they really wanted to do because they were afraid, and they did something else that was safer, but that leaves them at best dissatisfied, at worst miserable. That's not the kind of life that I want to live. As a secularist rather, who does not believe in an afterlife, I don't want to live a life of regret. I much prefer to say, oh yeah, I did that. It didn't work out. Oh well. Than to say, oh, I wish I'd done that when it's too late.
You had mentioned, you had posted a video in regards to, the state of the West. And I've been thinking about that since I watched it the other day, like nonstop. And first of all, it was very, very, very well done, what you said. And it really resonated with me. And kind of coming, back to what you said about people being fearful, here we saw the way society reacted over the last 3 years. And, some people are like, oh, people are awake now. Do you feel like people are awake? You've been all over the place.
Not really. There's a minority who kind of are, but most people don't understand what's happening. And what's happening is very simple. The global American empire is collapsing. It's not more complicated than that. The United States in the post-war period became a global empire. And what has happened is that this global empire has been co-opted by a leadership class that is unresponsive to the people and certainly not representative of the people. And they don't really care about the best interests of the people of the United States or the other Western democracies for them, Canada, the European countries, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. This cosmopolitan leadership class owes allegiance to one another, but not to the people. They don't care about the people. Now, this empire worked very well for a number of decades. One could argue that it started in 1945 and that it reached its pinnacle with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But subsequent to that, it became arrogant, it became bullying. And one of the key changes was that in the first period of the global American empire, between 1945 and 1991, the United States went out of its way to help its allies to grow their economies, to improve the living conditions of their people. It's very noticeable. You can notice it, by the way, in old films. If you watch, say, The Bicycle Thief, that's an Italian picture made in 1948, and you see what Italy looked like. It's a neo-realist movie filmed on the streets of Rome, I guess. I forget where it was. It's not set in Rome. I forget where it said. It doesn't matter. But you see what Rome or Italy looked like at that time in 1948. And then you see a movie filmed 10 years later, and you see it's totally different, totally new and renewed and vitalized. And the United States did that by way of economic incentives and fomenting trade, and did a lot of good for a lot of people around the world. It raised up the living standards of so many people around the world. But at some point, I would say in the 90s, the United States, rather than help other countries, started to hurt them. And now we're seeing it worse than ever, that they are deliberately trying to hurt every country that doesn't do exactly what the United States regime wants. And it's a tragedy. And insofar as the global American empire is concerned, you see, everybody always says, this time it's different. It's never different. It's always the same. The story always repeats itself. Every empire decays and collapses. It's inevitable for different reasons. But I think it's basically human exhaustion, the exhaustion and just mismanagement. And quite frankly, you know, the later generations are not so capable as the previous generations. And so we're seeing this in American leadership, geopolitical, diplomatic, military, political. They are simply not up to the task of running the global American empire, and they're making mistake after mistake, creating enemies everywhere they turn. The rest of the world hates the United States with a passion. I mean, they really want the United States to go under. And you know, the countries that are quote unquote America's allies, right? They're not allies. They are just scared of the United States because they see the United States randomly thrashing around and doing all kinds of stupid things, provoking the wrong people for no reason whatsoever. And it scares the rest of the world. And on top of that, you know, the United States now is in this weird imperial decay period where they are, you know, they're trying to turn children into catamites. I mean, the sexual perversity is just off the charts. And they want to export this stuff. And the rest of the world is horrified by this stuff. And they want no part of it. But, you know, the Americans are pushing this insanity. And so this is just another reason why the rest of the world wants nothing to do with the United States. And the United States is cratering. As an economy, its financial system is teetering. Its industrial base has been exported, and so now it's gone. That's one of the big surprises that the Washington establishment discovered, that they couldn't arm the Ukraine, the Kiev regime, with all the weapons that it wanted to because the United States doesn't produce it anymore. And so you see the American empire kind of like collapsing, and it's collapsing a lot faster than anybody anticipated. And it's becoming a lot more repressive because as these people who are in positions of control, of power, they become more insecure because they're not stupid. They understand that their reach is rapidly shrinking. Their power is collapsing. And so what happens is that they start to implement more and more repressive measures against anybody that they perceive as an enemy. And eventually they're going to perceive the entire population as an enemy. I mean, right now, the Biden administration has openly said that they are against any white Christian right-wingers. That's half the country. You know, I mean, come on, you know, but they have declared them the enemy and they are repressing them and using state mechanisms, the FBI, the IRS, and so forth, to repress people. Recently, there was this group of black crazy guys. They're not crazy because they're black. They're just crazy, and they are the Black Israelites. They've said all kinds of nonsense, but among them, they've said that there should be peace with Russia or something like that, which is fine, you know. But the Biden administration wants to arrest them for free speech. And what happened to the First Amendment? You know, they're traitors. You know, they're going against the narrative. And that's repressive. And that kind of repression comes from insecurity. And so the leadership class is incredibly insecure because they know that the ship is sinking. and they don't know what to do. And so they're thrashing around, and they're trying for this war with China, thinking that it will solve all their problems. There are economists, like, for instance, Paul Krugman, to give a specific example. Krugman genuinely believes that if the United States were to get into a big old-fashioned war like World War II, the United States, number one, would win, and number two, the American economic situation would turn around and get back on top like it did after 1945. But I mean, that was almost 80 years ago. The world has changed radically since then. The United States has changed radically since then. But these people don't understand, you know? And so they are egging on the political leadership into a conflict with China that the United States will lose, and lose catastrophically. I'm talking, you know, 3, 4, 5 aircraft carriers sunk. And in their desperation and panic, this current leadership regime would probably use nuclear weapons against the Chinese. And the Chinese would respond. And so after that, you know, who knows what could happen? It could be terrifying. And so this moment that we're living in over the next, I'd say 18 to 36 months, is going to be a period unmatched since the Second World War of change. It's already happening. The changes that have happened just this year, insofar as, say, Iran and Saudi Arabia joining forces, you know, Turkey and Syria winding down the conflict and ending the Syrian civil war, the union between Russia and China, and how India is getting closer to Russia, closer than ever before. And because of it, there'll likely be a rapprochement between India and China insofar as the border issues that they have. You know, the world is changing radically, and the United States is finding itself increasingly isolated. And the leadership class in the United States recognizes this. And so they double down on their attempts to create chaos, because they think that chaos will serve their purposes. But it only serves to isolate them further, because people recognize that the United States is an agent of chaos, and everything it says is a lie. And, you know, and on top of that, they are realizing that the American power is rapidly deteriorating. So the rest of the world is essentially sort of like managing the decay of the global American empire. And, you know, let's hope that they manage it properly, and that the United States slowly sinks, kind of like the Russian Empire did, the Soviet Empire. Let me rephrase that. So like the Soviet Empire or the British Empire just sunsetted, you know. Let's hope it's peaceful, or relatively peaceful, you know, and not some catastrophic war with China. Though I am personally very pessimistic about that. I think that the war with China is inevitable, because too many people in the United States in positions of power want it. And so they're going to go ahead with it, and it's going to be catastrophic.
You think in a war like that against China, I mean, the history of China, what they do, and you're seeing this right now with Taiwan, and you saw it with Hong Kong, they don't put boots on the ground. And that's what people don't understand, is that, you know, World War III, a real World War III, it's not going to be like World War II.
No, no, the Chinese are very patient. They take their time, see, and they understand that you can draw flies with honey. And so, you know, they're just using soft diplomacy, using government, you know, Chinese infrastructure projects in foreign countries, and just slowly bringing people into their fold. Do keep in mind that traditionally China is a mercantile society, a mercantile mindset, if you will. They're interested in trade and making money, but they're not interested in conquering other people. And Taiwan is not other people. Taiwan is, they're all Chinese, okay? And Taiwan eventually is going to fold back into China, as it should. And that'll be that. But the notion that the Americans are quote unquote defending democracy, or whatever bullshit that they're saying insofar as Taiwan, that's a flat out lie. They're just using Taiwan as the excuse to go to war with China, just as they used Ukraine as the excuse to go to war with Russia.
And how would they be able to, they couldn't produce enough weaponry for the Ukrainians. How are they supposed to sell that to sending over to the Taiwanese, if I'm saying that right?
They think that the aircraft carriers are the solution. I think that the aircraft carriers and the planes on those aircraft carriers are the solution. And the thing is, see, the Chinese leadership, certainly the military leadership, has a hard-on to sink an aircraft carrier. I mean, they want that more than anything, because they've never forgotten or forgiven the Clinton administration in '96 for parading one of its aircraft carrier groups right through the Strait of Taiwan. See, we're powerful and you're not. And the Chinese have grown by leaps and bounds. It's astonishing what has been achieved in China by the Chinese Communist Party over the last 30 odd years. It's incredible. You know, the level of progress that has been seen in China over these past 3 decades. I don't think that has ever happened in history. I mean, it is just extraordinary. They really are, people in the United States especially. I have not been to China myself, but I know a lot of people who have, people who live there, people who see the day-to-day. And look, on social media, you can see how the Chinese people live on the day-to-day. They live very well. Their society works. You know, their subway systems, they're nice and clean and pretty. They've got high-speed bullet trains going all over the place. The United States can't even make a bullet train between San Francisco and Los Angeles, for crying out loud. And so, you know, the Chinese are not the stereotypes that most people in the West think. The Chinese are very sophisticated. They understand what's going on. And, you know, I think that the war with China is a last gasp of a dying empire. And to go back to my previous point, every empire collapses, every one. And we're seeing it now. I realized it was collapsing in 2008, to tell you the truth, with the financial crisis. Because what they should have done in 2008 was to have liquidated all the insolvent banks, Citibank, you know, Wells Fargo, all those banks. They should have been bankrupted. The shareholders wiped out, the bondholders taking over as owners, and the Federal Reserve should have set up new banks to have a healthy financial system. But instead of what they did, they kicked the can down the road, and they created quantitative easing, which is basically money printing. And they used quantitative easing to shore up the capital base of these banks. And of course, they created this rampant asset inflation where, you know, you have houses that, you know, in 2000 were worth $100,000, and today they're worth $1.5 million. And you're like, how the hell did that happen? And it happened because of the money printing that has been going on since 2008, 2009.
Was that called TARP? That was called TARP, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Yeah. That was the origin, but that wasn't the money printing. The money printing was quantitative easing. TARP was the government-approved project of $700 billion to bail out the banks. But the quantitative easing, that was the money print. And the way they did it was they printed money at the Federal Reserve, and they used that money to buy assets, you know, mortgage-backed securities predominantly, but also other kinds of corporate debt. And they bought these assets, but they from the banks, but they obliged the banks to use that cash to buy treasuries to shore up their capital base. So it gave the illusion that the banks were still solvent, and they really weren't. Okay, and it was at the expense of printing this money that, because of all this cash sloshing around, it gravitated towards assets, real estate, stock prices, that sort of thing. Back in, when was it, in the 90s, there was some fool who wrote a book, you know, Dow 36,000 or something like that. And everybody laughed and thought it was ridiculous. But we've gotten to Dow 36,000. And why is that? Because of quantitative easing that has been going on since 2009, 2010. Yeah, 2009. Because in 2010, they did the big one, which was QE2. That was the big one. That was the one that I thought, no, this is going to break the system. But these guys are very clever in terms of kicking the can down the road. And they've successfully kicked the can down the road until now. And now, with so much printing, with so much bullshit and rejiggering of the financial system to keep it afloat, finally, the can is simply too big to be kicked down the road any further. And so I personally think that there's going to be a tremendous financial crash, probably this year, certainly over the next 24 months.
Well, and then they widened their scope during that time, and it went outside of the banks, because they bailed out the automotive makers too.
Well, yeah, but they bailed them out. You know, you're talking about GMAC, which was the financing arm of General Motors. that GMAC had become like the tail wagging the dog. And GMAC, because of all of its defaults, it had to be bailed out, or General Motors would have gone under. And you can't have that politically, because General Motors, still at that time, was a major employer. You'd have hundreds of thousands of people suddenly out of a job if GM went under. I mean, not just GM, but also the adjacent industries that provide products, finished products, components, and services for General Motors. And it would have a cascading effect throughout the automotive industry. So they couldn't allow that to happen. But I mean, that goes to my point. See, capitalism is a great system. It starts to fail when you, as a government, do not allow companies to fail. That's the problem. See, and it goes back even further. I mean, the modern capitalism that exists in the United States and in the Western economies too, it starts from the 1960s. I think it was 62, when Alan Greenspan, who was then an up-and-coming economist, he wrote the foreword to a collection of essays by Ayn Rand, the writer. He's a big fan of Ayn Rand's. And in this essay, he argued that monopolies were not bad so long as they didn't gouge the consumers. That you ought to allow monopolies, but only so long as they don't overcharge customers. And that sounds on its face, well, okay, I guess I can see it, because a monopoly is more efficient, because competition definitionally is inefficient, because when you have many people competing, there are some who are going to fail. And so the capital accumulated by those who fail, that capital will be lost in terms of the aggregate number. And so if you, rather than allow unfettered competition that will have a level of loss because of failure of capital, that in the aggregate is not so good as allowing a monopoly or an oligopoly to emerge in a particular industry, because you won't have loss of capital. And that was the argument that Alan Greenspan, I'm giving a very brief description of it. It's more complex than this, but for purposes of this conversation, that's clear enough. And so Greenspan was the opinion that monopolies and oligopolies are fine so long as they don't gouge customers. And so as chairman of the Federal Reserve, he allowed it. He even encouraged it by giving preferential treatment to the banking sector and letting the notion that monopolies and oligopolies are fine. And so across American industry today, in every industry, you have oligopolies. You have a few players who control everything. Now, that, of course, means that if any one of these companies goes under, that entire industry goes under. And the loss of all those jobs and the disaster that it can be for the society as a whole. And so there's no competition, but there are these monopolies. And these monopolies eventually start acting in ways that are inefficient because they have no competition. See? And so that is what we are seeing. And that's why so many industries, you have these monopoly players or oligopolistic players who control an entire market, and they can do whatever they want. And there is nothing to be done. And if they fail, it becomes a too big to fail issue, like what happened in the banks in 2008. But it happens in every industry in the Western economies, that there are just one or two, three dominant players, and you can't allow them to fail because that entire industry would vanish. And that is a severe problem that we are seeing now, because these monopolies, because they had so much access to easy money by way of the Federal Reserve policies of asset inflation, well, all of a sudden now they're all weak, they're all teetering, they're all corrupt, they might collapse. If there is a big financial shock, they will collapse. And so, when I say about a financial crash over the next, 9 to 24 months, I'm not just talking about the financial sector. I'm talking about the whole goddamn economy. Because see, if the banking sector collapses, so many other industries who will need financing just to continue going will also collapse. And they will be these monopoly players in all of these industries. And so it's not just the banking sector that will go under. It's like the whole economy will go under. See? And that's a frightening thing. And it's just remarkable that the Western leadership class allowed things to decay to this point, and they fundamentally know it. That's the thing. And that's why they're so desperate. They fundamentally, in their bones, on some visceral level, they understand it. Do keep in mind, these people are not stupid. I criticize the Western leadership class, and I might be giving you the notion that I think that they're stupid. I think that they lack judgment. When I say, oh, these people are stupid, I don't mean that they have low IQ points. Oh, no, I'm sure that most of them have more IQ points than I do and you do together. They have a lot of IQ points, but they don't have good judgment, see? And they don't understand the realities of an industrial economy and how everything is interconnected. They don't understand this. And we see this, when the diplomatic and political leadership in Washington says, oh, we're going to send all this weapons to Ukraine. And then they turn around and they start telling the industry, well, start cranking up. And the industry say, we can't, it's just not possible. I forget, one data point was artillery shells. At this point, I think what it is that now they can produce 19,000 shells a month. And that in maybe 3 to 4 years, they'll be able to triple that number, perhaps. Okay, and 19,000 shells a month sounds like a lot, right? But the Russians are firing between 10 and 20,000 a day. Okay, and so 19,000 is like, one day, maybe two of the Russians firing. Okay, the Kiev regime has far fewer. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're sending over maybe 3,000 shells a day if they're lucky, because they're running out. Because the Western leadership thought that they had this big giant of an industrial production behind them, but they don't, because they don't understand that the policies of deindustrialization in the last 40 years approximately has led to this atrophied industrial base that cannot sustain industrial warfare as is happening now in Ukraine, you see? So we're going all over the place here in this conversation, but it's fun,
Well, and getting back to, what you anticipate to happen in the United States and in other Western countries, do you feel like people are just burying their heads in the sand? And, we
Sure.
said a minority of people understand what's going on, but I find in my world, my day-to-day, people think this is all going to go away.
Yeah, sure. It's like this. You get a notice from the bank saying that you're late on your mortgage payment. And what do? You just leave it there, figuring, some leprechaun will come and fix it for me. And then the next month, the next notice of non-payment of your mortgage shows up, and you just set it there, and you're like, it'll fix itself. I'm not going to look at it, because people rarely want to look at serious problems in the face. It's easier to distract yourself. It's easier to just play video games, get on Netflix, go out with friends and have some drinks. It's much easier to do that than face the real problems that you have in front of you. It's human nature.
People have taken all this for granted, and the realities of what's coming, things are going to change drastically for people. And people say that I'm crazy for saying this and talking to you about this stuff, but I don't see any other way out. And what you said in your video, which I thought was, again, is stuck with me, the fact that people need to start thinking about leaving these Western countries.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the idea of staying in the West is foolish at this point, because look, the West, if you look at a map, two maps, look at a map that shows the Western Alliance, if you will. It's Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, I mean, Europe, generally, European Union, right? You look at that map, and then you look at another map, at a map of countries that are chronically in debt, that they have a negative balance of payment, and their governments are consistently in a deficit spending. the maps coincide. They're identical. Every other country in the world has a balance of trade, a positive balance of trade, and their governments are not in deficit spending. They might be here and there for circumstantial reasons, but they're not chronically in debt, okay? The only nation in the West that is not chronically in debt is the Dutch government, I think. Every other government, and the Norwegians, every other country in the world, in the Western world, what we call the West, they're all massively indebted. And they're getting to the point where they can't service this debt anymore. And so, yeah, all of this stuff is coming together, okay? There's a famous saying, how do you go bankrupt? You go bankrupt very slowly and then all at once. And that's what's happening, you know? The West is going bankrupt. They're not going to be able, in Europe, for instance, they're not going to be able to live up to their social welfare system programs. They're not going to make good on their promises to their people. It's already happening. In the United States, you know, the whole thing socially, I mean, you see what's going on, the polarization, the extremism, I mean, all of that just points to the same thing, to just a big smash up. And so we're just gonna have to stand back and watch it. And if you're still in the West when it happens, good luck to you. Because if there's a serious crash, I'm talking like a crash, like inflation through the roof and all the rest of it. I mean, I'm not talking about like 10% inflation. I'm talking about, you know, 28% inflation per month, something like that, where your dollar literally becomes worthless. You can wipe your butt with it, and you know. When that happens, see, where do most people in the United States live? They live in cities and suburbs. What do you need if you live in cities and suburbs? You need food, because they don't grow food in the suburbs. They don't grow food in the cities, right? How do you get the food? On a truck. What happens if the truck can't get gasoline? Well, then you're not going to have any food now, are you? If you're living in New York City, if you're living in some nice suburb of Westchester, you know, you're not going to get food. You're not, because the truck isn't going to come because they can't afford the gasoline, or perhaps there's no gasoline. You see? And so you're going to go hungry. And this is a fact, and this has happened in other countries that have experienced similar situations. Okay, so what I'm telling you is not like some novel thing that I'm making up out of the clear blue sky. This has happened. It's only happened in like small little countries. We've never seen it like on a massive scale with hundreds of millions of people, but we will, you know, and that's going to be something else, you know. Yeah, so I mean, it's crazy to be in the West. It's absolutely insane to remain in the West, because look, I live by the motto, you know, better 2 years too early than 30 minutes too late. You know, in a situation like this of rapid deterioration of the society, which we are witnessing, we are seeing it now, don't kid yourself. Well, rapid deterioration of the society, we see it, you know, in the looting going on, because that's what it is, it's looting. You know, when a swarm of people show up at some target and just steal everything, that's looting, you know. So we're seeing that. We're seeing the crazy political shit and the repression going. See, these are all signs that we're going in that direction. And maybe I'm a doomer. Maybe I'm like a crazy prepper. I'm not a prepper, actually, but, you know, some crazy doomer who thinks that, you know. But I'm telling you, this is the direction of travel. And yeah, I made that video in November of 2021 or October of 2021. And yeah, it's time to go. The party is over, you know? And yeah, of course, most people will disagree. Most people say that, you know, oh, I'm like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Okay, fine. You know, tell me in 5 years.
I like that line. Better 2 years too early than 30 minutes too late. There's another mug.
Yeah.
Okay, I just give you another mug.
There's another mug, yeah. You know, that should be my new profession, you know, like making, you know, clever quips for mugs and selling them on eBay or whatever.
That's a new series for you. That's actually really good. That's a really good line, actually. I might tweet that, quote you on that after we get done here. That's really good.
Sure, feel free.
But I will quote you because I've watched these Twitter wars where people don't give people credit, and it turns into a whole shit show.
It's just blah blah. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not somebody who's like particularly concerned about getting the credit. Right? What does it serve? Your ego and to impress people, hey, honey, you're real hot. You know that I had a tweet that some other people quoted. Ooh, doesn't that make me cool? When has that ever worked? I mean, come on, it's
Bigger things to worry about right now, I think.
yeah. We were talking before the show about AI. Like one of your previous guests had AI, was talking about AI. I find the AI thing really, really interesting. Because I don't think that people really understand what the AI really means. Because what it really means is that, like chat GPT or GTP, I always forget.
GPT.
Yeah. See, these AIs, and not just that chat GTP, but other ones, they can write like a legal brief, like a really good legal brief, with just a few prompts, right? Now, what does that mean for a law firm? They don't have to hire the low-end associate and pay him $300 an hour to write that brief. It'll take that associate attorney 2 hours to write it, and at $300, say $200 an hour. Okay, that's $400. That they don't have to pay that to the AI now, do they? Probably hire it on a subscription basis. Maybe they paid $1,000, but that AI will churn out all kinds of legal briefs and what have you. And something similar happens with architecture firms. Some naughty problem that they might have architecturally that requires a lot of design work, they can put it into an AI. The AI will do it. And so what will start to happen is that, see, if you have here, the upper third of the income stream of the professions, right? It's the people at the bottom who are going to be eaten away by AI. The associate attorneys, the associate professors. I mean, everybody who's like not at the very top tier, but sort of like lower or starting out. They're the people who are going to suffer with the AI initially. Okay. And the AI eventually will do all of the kind of brain power stuff that you thought you needed a highly trained person. Now, why is this interesting? Because the American economic model for the last 40 years has been, let's export our low educational work, our industrial work to other countries, and let's focus on high value added businesses, which seemed prima facie like a good idea. Just focus on design work, on the more sophisticated, cognitively sophisticated work to give greater value added to our economy.
Like the tech, not to interrupt you, but like the tech, like more in the tech, software, programming, those types of positions.
Yeah, exactly. More jobs that required education. That was why deindustrialization was sold to the American people. Yeah, you're going to lose your factory, but we'll give you all these educational opportunities to retrain you so that you can learn to code and crap like that, right? But now with AI, it can do that. And so the American economy is going to find itself that in those value-added positions, it's going to get shrinking. It's going to become smaller because of AI. And so the entire economy is going to be hollowed out by AI. And what will this lead to? It will lead to a whole number of people being totally unemployed. And we have seen this over the last 30, 40 years with the less educated people in the United States. They don't have a good factory job that can support themselves and their families, right? And so, that deindustrialization hurt the bottom third of the country and maybe the bottom half. But, and there were people in the middle who sort of like rose up by getting degrees at different colleges and all this education to be able to do these cognitively more complex tasks. But now they're going to be eaten away by AI. And so what is going to happen is that you're going to have this large proportion of the American population that is functionally idle and delivering Uber Eats and crap like that, and they're coming with robots, so maybe delivery robots, so maybe they're not even going to be able to work as an Uber delivery person or whatever, right? And so you see what's going to happen. You're going to have a huge portion of the population that's going to be idle, and this goes back to the Luddites of the 19th century. The Luddites were people who were against industrialization and who deliberately tried to destroy and sabotage factories and machineries because they said that they were the machines were taking away jobs from the people. Well, this is what's going to be happening with AI, but of course you're not going to be able to destroy the AI because it's going to be in some office somewhere, and everybody's going to be unemployed. What are these people, these unemployed people, these idle people, going to do? Huh? This is a legitimate question. It's something that people have not thought hard enough about. And they're not thinking about it at all. They're thinking that AI is going to repress everybody and it's going to be like, that's not the problem. Repression by the AI, that it turns into Skynet or some shit like that, that's not the problem. Okay, that's just the science fiction bullshit. The real problem is the creation of this enormously large idle population that has nothing to do except sit in their little apartments and watch TV, and if you have enough of those people, it causes a revolution. Of course, I mean, people who are unemployed, who have no prospects, no future, no hope for the future, those people are the ones who become desperate. Those are the people who start saying, yeah, let's just rob stuff. Let's just, do whatever is possible, because this misery of an existence is just too awful. See, those are the people that will overthrow governments and regimes. And so, the AI thing, I'm not concerned about Skynet, that it's going to launch the nukes and AI is going to try to take over the world. That is not my concern. My concern is, what do you do with all these people who are unemployed and unemployable because there's no position for them? See, this has been a problem with industrial society for the last 200 years, but to a much smaller extent. Let me give you two data points, or one data point. The US Army, it gives everybody an IQ test. Of course, they don't call it an IQ test, but it is an IQ test. The military, the American military, was the first to implement IQ tests widespread. And it makes complete sense for the military because they want to see how smart everybody is so they can assign them the correct task. And by way of experience, the US Army knows that they cannot take in anybody with an IQ score of 83 or lower because they simply do not have the cognitive capacity to do any job in the military. Okay? And this is a fact, and you might think it's ugly or, I don't know, racist or something like that, but this, calling it something despectively doesn't change the reality. People who have an 83 IQ score or lower simply cannot function in the American Army, not even as a truck driver, because they don't have the intellectual capacity to be able to do the task in a dependable manner. Okay? Now, if you look at a graph, at a distribution curve of IQ, right, the median is 100. That's the average, right? It's a bell curve, and right on the middle, that's 100. People who are on the 83 IQ score, that's a little over a standard deviation from the norm. And so roughly 15% of the population in the West, in any population, has less than 83 IQ points. See? And this has been the problem with industrial society since the very beginning of it. Roughly 1 in 7 people just do not have the brains to have a job in industrial society. And this is an ugly thing to consider, but it's the truth. Now, because of this, 1 in 7 people, well, there are other 6 people in the society, right? They can shoulder the burden of basically supporting them by way of welfare and work projects and sticking them into prison, because that's another way that industrial society in the United States has solved this problem of people with low IQ scores, because the people with low IQ scores tend to have very little impulse control, an unawareness of future consequences. And so if you were to go to any prison in the United States and give everybody an IQ test, roughly half of them are below 83 IQ points. They just don't have the capacities to survive in the outside world, okay? In the industrial world. Now, if you start moving that line of 83 points because of AI, and you start moving it up the scale, where all of a sudden, you know, the AI could do every cognitive task that requires 110 IQ points or less, then you see the problem you're going to have. You're going to have a much larger proportion of the population that has nothing to do because they're simply not smart enough to compete with the AI. There are people who've got 140, 150 IQ points. They're going to be fine. They're going to be doing other shit. They're going to be at the high levels. But the majority of the population, there's going to be nothing for them to do. You see the problem? And this is something that should be considered. But of course, in the discourse in the West, nobody dares consider such problems, which are, you know, foundational. Because you have to think to yourself, you know, you're running a society. And what is the point of a society? To provide for the majority, as many as possible, to provide them with you know, water, food, shelter. Those are the three things that everybody needs, right, to survive. If you don't have water, you're not going to live for long. If you don't have food, same. If you don't have shelter, same. So a society has to provide these things and has to provide some sort of meaningful work for a majority of the population. But if it can't, or it won't, because it has allowed technology to make them idle without any control of this technology, then you're going to have a substantial portion of the population that is idle, and they're going to be pissed, and they're going to wreak havoc. And that's the inevitability. That's why I worry about AI. The notion that it's going to set up Skynet and, you know, try to have everybody blow up in a nuclear war and take over the world, that is not a concern.
Good movie though.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to add to the AI standpoint, and this is what Dave and I were talking about the other day. You know, in regards to healthcare, because look at the nurse practitioners, the physician's assistants that are at these urgent cares today and quick cares and whatever they're called. What's going to be the need for those jobs? You put your symptoms into the AI and they write you a script or order your
proves
MRI.
my point now, doesn't it? It proves my point, doesn't it? It's the lower tier that is going to be affected by AI.
People, they've sold this idea though that this is just such a great thing, and because people are lazy and they're going to embrace it and they're going to, you know, everyone's going to use it, and no politician will stop this because they're going to get paid.
Yeah. So however you look at it, the West's days are numbered. Okay, I mean, it's not going to be a pretty sight. So you just have to understand that this is what's coming, and so you have to prepare accordingly. You know, I personally am a person who I'm not into the whole thing of going to a cabin in the woods and setting up my own little farm or something like that. Screw that. You know, I want to go to nice restaurants and have somebody else make my food for me, right? So I left the West. I have no intention of returning. I could whenever I wanted to. I've got the passports.
You don't think, I'm interrupt you. You don't think you don't think you'll ever come back to the United States?
Why would I? I mean, what's there?
Or go to a Dodger game or anything in LA? You know?
I can watch it on TV, you know. I can go to a soccer game, you know, in some other country or whatever. You know, I mean, seriously, what is there in the United States that makes it so special? I mean, I'm asking as an actual question.
Well, I mean, this is the only place I've ever known, so you know, I look at it as a place that's special, right?
Yeah, because it's your home.
Right.
Yeah, but why is a place your home? Because of location or because of the other people there?
I would say for the people that are here.
Yeah, and that makes sense. You know, if you've got like a strong you have a close relationship with your family members, you know, you have strong and deep friendships, that would make sense to stay in some place. But the hard reality is that people in the United States and the West generally, they're completely atomized. They're completely separate. You know, I mean, it's a trope. You know, people grow up in their homes with their parents, and then they hit 18 and they go off to college, and then which is in a different city, a different state, maybe across the country. They see their parents, you know, maybe a couple times a year, and then after that, they get some job in some other place far from their university and far from their hometown. And the bonds of affection and need between families gets broken apart. And so people become just atomized strangers. And they see their parents, you know, for Christmas. And then after a few years, not even for Christmas, it becomes sort of like a, you know, once every couple of years, maybe a Zoom call here and there. But you see, that's another problem of industrial society, that people have become atomized. And it's a very dispiriting picture. You know, it's I don't see what exists in the United States that would make it attractive other than business opportunities of some sort, but not even, because the American economy is really decaying. Unless you're in some very specific niche that you know that in the United States you're going to make a boatload of cash over the next 5 to 10 years. Well, then, yeah, sure. But just, you know, isn't America great? Shouldn't you come here? No, it's quite awful, quite frankly. And compared to other countries, Russia, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, there are a hell of a lot more opportunities there than in the United States. So, you know, that's the truth.
And you talked about in your video too, that any, you know, the Second Amendment, you know, people can talk about the Second Amendment and have all the guns that they need, you know, all the guns that they want. But in the end, the military is not the same military that we knew before.
No, no. And over the last few years, over the last 5 years, they've made a concerted effort to remove all the conservative types from the military service, certainly from the officer corps. And so the officers who are in charge of the military, you know, they are wokesters. They are people who, they look at what before were called red-blooded Americans as the enemy. You know, a red-blooded American would be horrified by the whole pedo thing that's going on, by the whole transgender thing going on. They'd be horrified by it. And now, if you say anything against that, you become targeted by the government. Who needs that? You know, I mean, like in Russia, to give a specific example, they passed a law some time ago, making it totally illegal to give any kind of propaganda for the LGBTQP plus movement. In Russia, you cannot give that propaganda, let alone to kids. They'll go straight to jail, and they're not screwing around. That's sensible. I mean, come on, right? I mean, you know, like when I remember when I was 10 years old in school in California, they didn't have these picture books showing sex acts between adults, you know, and perverted sex acts between like two men or two women or something like that. They didn't have books like that. I mean, it would have been inconceivable. You know, these books are so obscene that are being shown to kids in like the 5th grade and the 4th grade. They are so obscene that CNN cannot show them live on the air. That's how obscene they are. And yet that's the kind of garbage that is being shoved in the face of children. The rest of the world looks at them, this is insane. And in the United States, they're like, oh yeah, that's fine.
And then the whole idea of, and I bought into this for a period of time, you know, or you push the people on the right far enough, they'll push back. And that's when the change will occur. I don't believe that anymore.
No. The right wing is, there are two problems going on. Well, look, it all goes back to this issue of tolerance. Tolerance is the nefarious ideology, as far as I'm concerned. Because see, tolerance, what is tolerance specifically? It is accepting something that you do not particularly agree with. And that's fine. There are lots of things that other people do that I'm not keen on. But in a multicultural country where people have different customs and different beliefs and what have you, tolerance to a degree is necessary. But what has happened is that tolerance has been pushed to the very limit of not merely putting up with things that you don't particularly like, but having to actively accept things that you abhor, that you think are horrible, and not being able to do anything about it. And that's what's happened to the right. The right, certainly the establishment right, the GOP right, you know, they accept everything. They don't really push back on any of this stuff, right? And the only people who do are considered marginal, crazy, far right, you know, whatevers. But it's stuff that 20, 30, 40 years ago, people would find horrifying. But now it's the norm. And on top of that, you have figures in the dissident right movement. I'm thinking specifically of people like Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug, and people like Bronze Age Pervert, who have co-opted the intellectual sphere of the right and are pushing for more tolerance and to try to neuter anybody who would actively oppose this. I mean, make no mistake, those two people that I've mentioned, their job, and I do believe they are paid, is to neuter any kind of right-wing opposition to any of these horrible things that are going on. And so, you know, the right wing isn't going to save you, you know. And by the time it gets so bad that the right wing actually starts to do something productive, it'll be far too late. And we are getting to that moment very, very quickly with remarkable speed. It's just astonishing, you know. And it's so weird that it's the transgender thing that was the poison pill that really accelerated this whole nightmare, you know, because I never would have believed it, but it's the transgender thing. Because transgenders, who are they? These people are, the transgender people are people who have a mental illness. And we should feel compassion for those who are mentally ill and try to help them. Let me give you a specific example. Suppose you are a doctor and a 16-year-old girl shows up at your consult. And she is, you know, say 5'7" inches tall, and she's weighing 60 pounds. You know, she's a skeleton, right? And she says to you, "Oh, doctor, I'm so fat. I need to lose more weight." What would you say as a doctor? You would say, "My dear, you have anorexia. You have a distorted sense of your own body. You are ill. You are mentally ill. And you are killing your body by not eating and trying to lose more weight. And so we are going to put you into therapy, and we might have to prescribe medications to help you because you are mentally ill. It's not that you're too fat. No, you're too skinny. You need help, and we will help you." I mean, that's what most doctors, I would assume, would say, right? I mean, if I'm giving this hypothetical to you, you would say that, yeah, sure, that's exactly what I would tell this poor girl, this poor 16-year-old girl, right? But what happens with a girl who says, "Oh, you know, I'm feeling so uncomfortable in my body, you know, maybe I'm a boy." Right then, they prescribe, you know, hormone blockers, puberty blockers, as they call them, and they start putting them on this escalator of treatment to change their bodies into their preferred gender. No, these people are mentally ill. And the medical establishment is pushing this because they make money. That's why they do it. You know, an operation to remove the healthy breasts of a young girl who wants a mastectomy in order to appear more like a man, you know, those operations, a doctor can easily earn, you know, between $30,000 and $50,000 per operation, just a couple of hours in an operating room, $30,000 to $50,000. So he is financially incentivized to push this. And you go through the different stages to get to this point, and you realize that everybody's being paid off to encourage girls. And as an adult man, I know exactly what's going through the head of a 16-year-old girl who feels uncomfortable in her body. What's happening, of course, is she hit puberty. All of a sudden, her breasts start emerging, her hips get wider and rounder, and her body is making all these weird changes. And on top of that, because she's showing signs of sexual maturity, which is perfectly normal, men instinctively will like notice her more because she is growing into sexual maturity. And of course, she's going to feel physically very uncomfortable during this brief period of her development. And it's unfortunate, but it's just a part of life and a stage that everybody has to go through. Every woman has to go through. But instead of that, a minor inconvenience, a minor feeling of being a little bit miserable in your own body, and all of a sudden you get on this escalator of the trans escalator, and you start getting drugs, surgeries to change you into your appropriate gender with catastrophic results. And so you see what's going on here, it's horrifying. And there's nobody around to stop it. It's just continuing. And it's going to get worse, much worse. And so that for these reasons that I've been discussing, these various issues, social issues, economic issues, geopolitical issues, I don't see the West recovering. And so I don't want to be around for this shit show. I much prefer to observe it from afar than to be smack dab in the middle of it, worrying about where I'm going to get food because the trucks with the food are not delivering it to the supermarkets anymore because there's no gasoline. I don't want to live that kind of life. If that makes me a turncoat or just evil, a traitor somehow, fine. If people hate me, they can hate me, but I'll have a nice dinner at a nice restaurant, while they hate me from afar. You see my point. I'm being facetious, but it's a serious point. And the people clearly do not have the will to change the direction of travel. And it's a catastrophe. And it's heartbreaking. Because at this point, I've reconciled myself to this heartbreak, but it took me a long time. Because I grew up in Southern California in the early 70s. And I remember Southern California very well. It was a land of opportunity. They called it the Golden State for good reason, because there was in the air, you had this sense that anything was possible. This was right after Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and he did land on the moon. Don't give me this bullshit that he didn't. And it was this, because I so hate those guys who deny things objectively, just to get the attention and shit. I really hate them. But anyway. It was a land of opportunity, and you felt it in the air. And then there were the doldrums of the 80s. I remember that. I remember my parents having to get up at like 5 in the morning and drive both cars to the gas stations in 79, to fill it up because of the oil crisis going on. I remember that, but I also remember the 80s where things were just blossoming once again. Everything seemed to be just onwards and upwards. And the 90s seemed to be like the pinnacle. But then it just started slowly decaying. And the global war on terror just accelerated the decay. The lies that were told to invade Iraq, and then the endless occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan that served no purpose except to just throw away money and lives for nothing. And now, we have this conflict in Ukraine, and now then what's coming up is this conflict with China, although I personally believe that the Americans will probably invade Saudi Arabia before the war with China, because I think that the Americans are getting very nervous about what Saudi Arabia is doing, and they'll try to invade it or somehow topple the government there, the government of Mohammed bin Salman. But that's like for another conversation, I suppose. But yeah, the United States is going from bad to worse. And I understand loyalty, but you cannot be. There is a point where loyalty, how can I put it? You have this friend, and he's a junkie, and you've known him since 5th grade, and you love him. He's your best friend. He was there when, for all the big moments of your life. But, you guys went to college, and then after college, he discovered heroin, and he became a junkie. And it just breaks your heart. And you try to help him, and you try to put him into some program. When he comes to you begging for money, you give him some cash. Maybe he steals your TV, to pawn it so he can get some money for some drugs, right? And you're furious at him, and you're like, but I love him. He's my best friend. But there comes a moment when all the love and all the loyalty you felt for your junkie friend is just not enough. And you have to let go. You have to say, far enough. And that moment might be a big moment, like when he steals your TV, or it could be a little moment. It's just some trivial little thing that happens. Maybe he doesn't show up when you were supposed to meet up for drinks or something. And you just say, enough. This isn't the guy I used to know. He has the same name, the same face, but the guy I know today is not the guy I became best friends with in the 5th grade. He's not the guy who helped me, hook up with with the girl I was madly in love with but didn't dare talk to in high school. He's not the guy who I'd crash at his apartment, when I was in college, and didn't know what to do with my life. No. This guy is a junkie, and he's going to pull me down, and I have to just cut it. Painful though it may be, I have to cut this relationship and end it, because if not, it's just going to pull me down with him. And do I want that? And that's how you have to look at the situation with the United States. And look, to me personally, it was very, very difficult to realize how completely fucked up the United States and the West generally has become. Because I'm a man of the West. I'm from Chile, and culturally, I trace my cultural and intellectual heritage, Chile to Spain, Spain to Rome, Rome to Greece. I'm a man of the West. And the values that I learned in the United States and schooling in the United States and so forth, they're values that I believed in. But the nation, the culture that exists today in the West, it's like that junkie friend. And it was a painful process for me, quite frankly. And I'm not being facetious or hyperbolic. It was painful to realize that the West is beyond saving. But it is beyond saving. And you have to realize that it's time to let go. It hurts. Of course it does, because you have feelings of affection and loyalty and love. But you have to know when, your junkie friend is going to pull you down to the bottom along with him, and know when to let go and decide, I'm going to move on.
I know I'm running out of time here with you, but you got a few more minutes?
Sure.
Next year, 24 election, you made some great. I loved your the Biden. You're putting your support behind Biden. That was great. With regards to Hunter.
I'm making it very official so that you guys listening or watching now will know. I am a firm supporter of Biden 2024. Hunter Biden 2024. Yes, not Joe. Screw Joe. He's an old man. Hunter Biden. He will give us a hooker and an 8-ball every week. Vote for Hunter Biden 2024. He's the man for all of us. He will make us happy. I'm calling it. You think I'm crazy, but old Hunter, he's got his connections. He can get us an 8-ball and a hooker, a new one with it every week. I'm telling you, laugh, but I'll be the one who laughs last.
Gonzalo, there was an older guy that I used to work at a bank a long time ago, and he would come in and he would always say, he's from New York. He'd chew his cigar when he'd sit with me, and he would say, hookers, they're not hookers. They're messengers from God, spreading the love.
Well, nowadays, all the girls are hookers. Every girl who's on OnlyFans, she's basically a hooker. She's showing off her body for money. If you called her up and said, "Hey, honey, I'll offer you $1,000 for a night," she'd probably say, "Yeah." And it's fomented. Now they call it sex work. I mean, when I was growing up, they just said, "Oh, she's a whore. She's a prostitute. She's a hooker." But now they're like sex worker. See how repackaging can turn even the most outrageous occupation into something palatable. It's pathetic. I mean, I truly feel sorry for the young women of today, because really they're encouraged in two directions: to either sell their bodies or sell their time, which is much more valuable, for some stupid career that will certainly not make them happy. And they figure that they have to do a career as opposed to finding a nice man and having a lovely family of their own. But no, they go for the career, and they say, you know, that they don't want to be a slave to a man and the kids. They prefer to be a slave to some boss and to some corporation that will never care for them. See, because you know, your own kids, they'll always love you. A boss, a company, it doesn't love you. It never will. But poor women are suckered into this life, and it's just a tragedy. And you try to point it out to them, and you know, they automatically say that, oh, you're with the patriarchy, you're evil. Okay, fine. You know, I mean, like, I know women, a lot of women, because I went to an Ivy League school, and you know, I read up on the class notes, and I see these girls who were very, very smart, you know, and they had all these degrees, and they went to professional school, you know, lawyer, doctor, whatever, VP of whatever. And now they're in their 40s, their 50s, and they're miserable. They've got nothing. And their career, of course, petered out quite some time ago, long past the possibility for them to get a man and build a family together. Yeah, they threw away their lives, and they're miserable about it. And the funny thing is that they brag about it. They say about, you know, the great stuff that they're doing, like going on some carnival cruise alone, you know. How sad is that, you know? I mean, like, you know, I don't want to go on vacation alone. I've vacationed alone. It's not fun. You want to go with other people, the people you love and like and care about, you know. But these poor women, you know, they've been suckered in. They bought the program, and now they have nothing in their lives. You know, it's kind of horrifying. But you know, that's the way of the world.
What do you know, right, Gonzalo? What do people
Yeah,
say?
and
I always say
I'm
that. What do
50,
I know?
you know, I've been around 55 years, and I've met thousands of people and gotten to know them well. I mean, I conservatively estimate that I've met and known about 5,000 people, that I've known their first and last name, a little bit of their life history, and where they fit socially, and who they were, more or less. Okay. And I can tell you, you know, with that level of experience, you start to see patterns emerging. You can't help but notice the patterns. And all these professional girls, they wind up very badly, you know. And it's just sad, but they don't believe you. They don't believe you until it's too late. Then they're like, oh, you were right, honey, it's too late.
You know, with 24, I mean, I'll be here by then and I'll vote, but I don't have, I mean, people are hanging on that this outcome of the election is going to change things.
No, it's not going to. No, no. Trump, DeSantis, it won't make a lick of difference. You know, Trump is going to be Trump, which is basically a blowhard who doesn't do anything. And DeSantis, he's a lot more plugged in to the deep state than people realize. He's one of their agents, you know. So he'll play ball with them, and they'll keep on doing what they've been doing, and nothing will change.
Robert Kennedy.
Oh, he's an idiot. He's a fucking idiot. Okay. And people, you know, they're thinking, well, he's a replacement for Biden, right? But you start looking into it, and he was even harsher in terms of like the medication and the lockdowns and stuff. And he's not the medication, the lockdowns. And he's an insane man insofar as climate change. He actually believes that nonsense. I used to work in renewable energy business, right? And I had a project in Chile to build solar panel power plant, right? We did like regulatory arbitrage. It's not important for this conversation. The important part is that I know about it. And when I got into it, I got in all wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to get into the renewable energy business, right? And I'll do good for the environment and blah blah, right?" And then I really got into it, okay, because it's inevitable that you start getting into the business to figure it out, and the products and everything. And I discovered multiple things. Number one, the climate change science is bullshit. It's all a lie. It's a complete lie. And what academics have used is social pressure to convince all the other academics that it's the truth. But even like the co-founder of Greenpeace says that climate change is just a lie. Number one. And parenthetically, when I was a kid, they were all talking about global cooling. They were talking about snowball Earth in the 70s and 80s. But then it became global warming. And now it's just climate change, which could go either way, which is exactly what happens with the fucking climate, right? Anyway, I learned that the whole climate change thing is just bullshit. Number two.
I love the way you said that.
Every,
not to interrupt you, I love the way you said that. Like, it's
What-
climate change.
what-
Climate change. I could go any fucking direction. So now they've made it universal. It's just climate change.
yeah. And the issue of the renewable energy, none of it works. None of it works. Okay. The wind turbine shit, it doesn't work. The solar panels, they don't work. See, you need the solar panels and the windmills to produce energy when it's cold, right? Because you need the electricity for the heating. That's precisely when they don't work. When there's no sun, when there's no wind. And on top of that, the actual wind turbines, the actual solar panels are an environmental nightmare. I mean, they really are. You know those big blades for the windmills, right? They don't degrade. You can only bury them, but they're not going to biodegrade or anything like that. They're going to be there forever. It's just scrap, okay? It's not even like a landfill. The landfill, eventually, all that crap will decay. No, these things don't decay. And insofar as solar panels are concerned, disposing of them is a nightmare because they have all kinds of chemicals in them to make them photovoltaic. That is just an absolute nightmare insofar as disposing them. If they break, which always happens, they pour out of them chemicals that poison the soil where they are installed. They're highly toxic, okay? And, you know, the whole thing is a scam to make money. The only way renewable energy makes money is by the government putting regulations in place that benefit them. But inherently, they are inefficient and environmentally dangerous. The only energy that is relatively safe and does not produce these hazards, or certainly not in the amount that solar panels and wind turbines do, is nuclear power. That's actually efficient. And of course, most especially of all, the fucking thing works when you need it, when it's fucking cold. But no. And insofar as like electric cars, you know, it's been estimated, accurately estimated, that there are not enough rare earth minerals on the planet that are readily accessible to human beings to build the batteries to replace all the internal combustion engine vehicles in the world. There's just not enough. And just the ones that exist now, okay, let alone, you know, next year and the year after that and the year after that, okay? It just doesn't exist. There's no way to replace all the trucks in the United States with electrical trucks. There's just no way. There aren't the minerals on the planet to do so, okay? So that is a dead end. I mean, sure, some guy can have a Tesla or whatever, fine, it's like a toy. But you cannot replace the internal combustion engine. There is just not enough of the stuff to go around for the batteries. You have all these problems, but of course they don't focus on those problems that are limiting factors that make it unviable. They just think that, oh, we'll just have electric cars. And of course they don't ask where you're going to get the electricity for the fucking electric cars, let alone the fact that the electric cars severely limit your range. I mean, I go to a gas station in a car, it'll take me 5 minutes to fill up the tank and keep on going. You know, get your batteries flat, it's going to take you a few hours before you can get them up to snuff again. And it's completely impractical, but people don't look at this. They think that there's a magic solution to problems. Oh, we'll all drive electric and problem solved. No, you know,
I wanted to share the story with you, and I know you can wrap it up. But you know, I live in Arizona, and I was talking to a guy. It was a while back. It was on here, supply chain logistic guy, and we were talking about the water situation. And I said we're going to run out of water, and he goes, "Mike, you moved to a place where there's no water. What did you think? Did you think you were never going to run out of water?" But they want to talk about climate change. And I literally talk to people because I am leaving Arizona. This is my last go around here. And
Mhm.
and one of the biggest things, but there's a number of reasons, but there's no water here. And there's
No.
no way to fix this unless God decides, or whatever spirit decides to drop a lot of water.
Yeah, water is going to be a major problem for a lot of places. Yeah, yeah. Look, the whole shit show is fucked. Okay, it's basically that.
Let's summarize real quick.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, bottom line, this conversation. Okay. Now, if people think that I'm a doom and gloomer, I'm a pessimist, and this and that, and they'll find some solution. Okay, I hope I'm wrong. I don't think so. Because how can I put it? One of the great things about being my age, middle-aged guy, is that you have had enough experience, especially if you've gone around the world and seen stuff and experienced stuff firsthand. And you realize that hope is not a strategy. It's just not a strategy. Hope that things will turn out okay. That's just foolish. It's crazy. Because things don't magically just turn around. You don't have an incredible stroke of luck and all your problems are solved. It doesn't work that way. But people tend to think that. I mean, I have my ideas as to why it is. Human beings evolved as persistent hunters. And you had to keep on chasing the prey until you captured it in order to survive. And in order to do that, to keep on chasing the prey, even though it was no longer, the sensible thing to do, you had to have hope and, that you'd catch it eventually. And that was a good strategy insofar as evolution is concerned. But insofar as running a modern industrial society is concerned, it's a horrible strategy. You have to have solutions, real solutions, long-lasting solutions. But there aren't any. Or more correctly, there are people who have these long-term solutions, but there is not the will to implement them because they would have costs, and people just don't want to pay any cost. They want everything for free, So we're just gonna have to watch how this shit show unfolds, because it's gonna be incredible, it really is. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it doesn't go up in a nuclear fireball, right? But if it doesn't, it's just going to be incredible. And we're already seeing like tastes of this over the last year. The stuff that's going to come up over the next couple of years, it's going to be even more unbelievable. I mean, really, who could have thought that the Americans would blow up Nord Stream, crippling the economy of one of their closest allies? Who could have imagined that? That alone is like, holy cow, right? All kinds of shit is going to happen like at that level of like, I cannot believe that happened.
And look at
and we're
even
going to see
just,
more and more of it.
and not to cut you off, but even just look at the media, how they've removed members of media over the last several months. And we were talking about Tucker Carlson, and the people, and maybe this will turn out this way, I don't know, but they're talking like, oh, he's going to be bigger than ever. Not necessarily. He can wash away if they want to just him not to speak. Silence all his videos.
Yep. If they could do it to Trump, why can't they do it to Tucker Carlson?
James O'Keefe. I mean, I know James O'Keefe is back. We'll see what happens with his new media company.
I hope it succeeds. I really like James O'Keefe.
Me too. I mean, but you don't find it coincidental right after that Pfizer video comes out? All of a sudden he's just gone.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That, I think that had a big part to play. Yeah, we haven't even discussed the medicine. Jesus Christ, what a shit show that is.
Maybe save that for next time. You got to come back, Gonzalo. You want to come back and chat more?
Sure, whatever you want, man. It was my pleasure.
Where can people find you?
The easiest place to find me is on my Twitter account, Gonzalo Lira 1968. Because whatever I do in other social media platforms, I post it always on Twitter. So Twitter is the best place to find me. Gonzalo Lira 1968.
We'll talk about your channel, your YouTube channel real quick. Your
I actually do 2 YouTube channels. I do a show called The Roundtable, where I have people come on and talk about different topics. And then I have my Gonzalo Lira Again channel, where I do solo videos, but I'm going to be revamping that whole situation a little bit. But for now, you can go there. Yeah.
And I'll put those channels on when I post this episode too.
Okay. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Last words, Gonzalo. Anything else you want to say?
Well, the whole shit show is fucked. That pretty much sums it up.
Never heard anybody end that way. No, I thank you for taking the time. I'm glad we were able to connect, and I look forward to more conversations with you and watch this whole thing unfold.
Okay, take it easy.
Mic drop.